Has American Christianity kind of lost a compelling apologetic witness? And could Augustine, of all people, provide a new way forward? Well, that's what the book The Augustine Way is all about. Let me tell you what I thought. Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. Okay, I just finished a review copy of The Augustine Way by Joshua Chatraw and Mark Allen from Baker Academic. And I want to say thank you to Baker for sending me a copy for review. This is my honest reaction and response to the book. Let me take you through my typical format of the main idea, the research behind it, the readability of its style, and then my reaction as a whole. So the main idea of The Augustine Way is these two co-authors are essentially saying that, in very broad strokes, the American generally evangelical Christian kind of movement has a few ways of doing apologetics that are essentially lackluster, that they believe that essentially there needs to be a little bit of a retrieval, and they believe that the retrieval to kind of get back to a more compelling apologetic defense of Christian faith can be done through looking back at Augustine, that church father famously from North Africa. From the 4th century. So that's what the title of The Augustine Way refers to, kind of reaching back to Augustine's writings, figuring out how did he defend the Christian faith in his time, and how might we learn from him and model a similar posture going forward. That's what the title's all about. They do that through various ways, but primarily looking at his writings, and then primarily comparing the posture of his writings to the posture of apologetics, broadly speaking, in our cultural moment. So that's the main idea. The research behind this book is, to no surprise, it's primarily research from Augustine's writings. Wisely, I think, a lot of people think of City of God. If you know Augustine, a lot of people think of City of God as his kind of work of apologetics. And they obviously agree with that, but they also, I think, wisely bring in Confessions. So his, spiritual autobiography of sorts. They bring his Confessions in, and I think this is really smart. They bring that in as a way to say, how did he kind of leverage this writing also as a defense of the faith, an apologetic kind of faith that was like finely tuned to his kind of cultural setting and his cultural moment. And I really, really like that they included Confessions in that. So that's a lot. The research is a lot of Augustine's work. But the other side of the coin of the research, so to speak, is their wide reading in current apologetic style writing. So they refer a lot to ways of doing apologetics in current books, book form, current books, current writers, and they've read quite widely in that field, and they are willing to name and cite specific works when they want to offer critiques or pushbacks, and specific names. And I thought that was really, really helpful. So they do it in a way that's very thoughtful, very reasoned. It's not just polemic, but it's very clear. And they're not afraid to name. We think person X should take some critique from Augustine in how they do apologetics. And so that's what the research is about. The readability of it is under Baker Academic's line. It skews a little bit more on the academic side, but it's not very long, and I would say it's not very dense. It's not very stultifying. It's not hard to understand. And earlier in the book, and this is one of my actually favorite parts of the book, they tell Augustine's story in kind of popular terms, and they actually imaginatively portray his life story and compare it to the story of someone who might be living today. And I just thought that was super enjoyable and really well done. Very kind of a gripping kind of entry into the book, thinking about this ancient figure and what he might have to bring to bear on our time. And so that's just one example of a pretty engaging style that they dove into, and I appreciated that a lot. In general, though, even when they do get into more of the quasi academic stuff, it's not hard to understand, not hard to read. Okay, and then that tees me up for my general reaction to this book. So I really liked and appreciated this book, and I want to say a few specific things that I liked about it. First of all, I really resonated with their general take on the state of apologetics right now. Apologetics is something that I've always had a little bit of a tortured relationship with, because I don't go in for, and this is kind of how they framed it up, which is part of why I was interested in the book. I don't really go in for the evidentiary approach, the Lee Strobel or Josh McDowell approach that just kind of evidence that demands a verdict, like highly logical, just like trying to string together thoughts in a way that almost like funnel, like it's like an intellectual funnel. It kind of forces the person listening into this like conclusion, or at least that's the attempt. I just think that's built on a certain kind of suppositions about how knowledge works, and what belief even means and faith even means, that I just don't share. And I've always rankled a little bit to that approach. So I've never gone in for that. I've also, however, never swung on the other side, which is, well, I don't know if the other side is the right way to frame this, but another option for apologetics in our time, it seems to be the more Cornelius Van Til presuppositional apologetics approach, which is not the evidentiary thing. It's more of a holistically different account of like how knowledge functions in human experience. And so the presuppositionalist account will essentially say, if you don't believe, then there's kind of no conversation to be had, because belief is a wholly fundamentally different set of presuppositions, and you can't even reason. A believer and an unbeliever can't even reason together, essentially. I know I'm probably, all the presuppositional apologetics fans are going to like hate me because of my woefully inadequate summary of that approach. But I've never gone in for that approach, because I think there's something really decisively missing about its account of epistemology and humanity, and how belief functions and what belief even means. I've just never really found that to be the presuppositional thing. I've just never found it to be adequate or compelling, to be honest. And so I've been a little bit at a loss as someone who, part of the reason I like to read so much, and I even do this YouTube channel, is because I love to represent Christianity in a thoughtful way in our culture. And in a sense, I love to be an apologist for Christianity in our time. I love seeing how Christian thought connects to the biggest pressing cultural issues, and how does it refute certain cultural issues, and how does it question, our cultural frameworks that we might have. It's why I love reading people like Charles Taylor, for example, on and on. So I've loved apologetics much more broadly, but I've never really resonated with the specific apologetic approaches that seem to be available in our time. And so I don't know where that's left me. And so that's why I was super interested in this book, The Augustine Way, because it seems like it's talking specifically about that. And to my delight and incredible pleasure, they frame up the apologetics options exactly like I just did, with the evidentiary approach and the presuppositional approach. And they essentially say Augustine would also not be content with either of those approaches, and here's why. And then they dive into his writings and kind of reconstruct how did Augustine do apologetics in his time, what was his posture. They reconstruct that a little bit, compare it to his setting, and then reach ahead and say, like, how might that same posture look today? How might we adopt a similar, an Augustinian posture, not just in content, but in posture, towards an apologetic kind of defense of the faith in our cultural moment? And man, I loved all that. I resonated so much with all that. I thought it was really helpful. I loved pointing to, I've never thought about looking at Augustine as a figure for that. I loved pointing to him for that. I thought it was really smart. I love that they incorporated the Confessions as one way to do that, because his way of retrieving his own narrative of his conversion was a way that he defended what it meant to believe to his culture and time. I just thought that was really, really smart. The only wrinkle I thought with this book is, and I'm even as I offer this as a thought, I'm not even sure. I'm not sure how this would have fit in the book, so I'm just going to put it out there. I almost wish that there were more. There's a lot of discussion of the posture of Augustine and how could the posture be better, and kind of pushing back on those two apologetics approaches I just outlined. There wasn't a lot of like, here's a really practical example of what that could look like on particular cultural issue X or Y, on the politicization of evangelicalism in America. Here's how this posture might manifest in that particular vein, or issues of gender and sexuality. Like, how might the posture of Augustine kind of look in an apologetic defense in that arena in our culture? There wasn't a lot of offering those specifics, and that might be intentional, because there might be the intention of the authors to leave that open for apologists to engage in. That would be fair. But I did find myself wishing on a few chapters, wishing oh man, I'd love just to see an example. I'd love to see a little bit more of this fleshed out, instead of just an argument for a new posture, which I also really loved and resonated with. So that was my only kind of wrinkle in kind of terms of my reaction to the book. But in general, this posture, this approach, their willingness to critique where it's fair, their critiques in themselves are very fair of certain apologetics writers today. And the retrieval of Augustine, I think, is a brilliant move that I hadn't thought of myself and wouldn't have if I didn't read this book. And so, man, this is a really great book. It's, if you're interested, similarly to me, if you're interested in apologetics as a discipline or an exercise, and if you also, like me, find a lot of current apologetics efforts to be lackluster, less than compelling, I think what is being offered in this book would probably be really refreshing and encouraging to you. So those are my thoughts on the Augustine Way, the new book from Baker Academic. As always, thanks for taking some time to watch.